You're right, it did go quiet. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Hello everyone, welcome to this discussion as part of the Beyond a Joke season. This particular discussion is about comedy and mental health. I'll just quickly introduce myself first of all so you know who I am. I'll read this lovely little description that has been written for me. Bruce Edhouse is a psychotherapist and comedian from Leicester. A former nominee in the Best Alternative Act category at the Midlands Comedy Awards. He also co-hosted the alternative comedy night Club Smashing in Leicester for several years. More recently, he has started to integrate mental health themes such as self-care and identity into his hour-long shows at the festival. It's a very nice introduction, which I wrote. And before we go any further, let me just quickly introduce our panellists here. First of all, we have Judith Critchley. Yeah. Judith is Leicester born and bred. She loves comedy and tried stand-up herself. She started producing and hosting her Tickle Pink Comedy Night in 2018, doing monthly live shows in local venues with very little experience. This allowed her to juggle being a single parent and living with bipolar disorder. Judith saw the lack of diversity in comedy nights and wanted to try and address this. If you can't see it, you can't be it. During the pandemic, she started online comedy shows every month and has done some live shows this year in Leicester and Nottingham. This is the fourth year Tickle Pink Comedy has had a successful run at the Leicester Comedy Festival, and in 2021 her comedy show was nominated for Best Promoter. Tickle Pink Comedy kicked off the Leicester Comedy Festival 2023 at the Y Theatre with a great evening of comedy. Next to Judith we have Rob G. Rob G worked for 12 years as a mental health nurse, mainly even in adult mental health, eating disorders and psychiatric intensive care. Now a full-time comic and poet, he's performed at over 100 fringe festivals across the world and won over 20 awards for his solo shows. He's a patron of Leicestershire Action for Mental Health Project, LAMP, and lead artist for Comedy Asylum, comedy shows written and performed by people receiving mental health treatment.
Oh, another one.
Next to me, we have Jack Campbell. Jack started performing comedy whilst at De Montfort University over a decade ago. In 2014, he won English Comedian of the Year, but it wasn't until 2019 that he went full-time with his stand-up, working various other jobs to pursue his comedy career. Of course, by 2020, the pandemic set in, and then he spent 18 months working in COVID testing centres, which inspired him to write a stand-up comedy show, which he took to the Edinburgh Festival in 2022. Jack. Lovely, so thank you very much for being here. Before we start, really, a quick word about what mental health is. We all know what comedy is, but do we all know what mental health is? Basically, as far as I see it, mental health is just like any other type of health. You have it all the time. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. You know, I don't know about you lot, but sometimes I hear people talking about others and saying, oh yeah, they've got mental health. And I'm like, yeah, everyone does. Yeah. So what we're talking about here today is not like not all the bad stuff, all the terrible stuff that you hear about everywhere, but we're going to talk about some of the positive stuff as well. And to start, just a little question for the whole audience, really. Not the audience. That would be.
We're here too, Bruce.
It's just my MC instincts kicking in. I'm doing a bit of crowd work, aren't they? So a question for all the panellists, really. How did you get into comedy at the start of your journey? And Judith, can we start with you?
Well, I did a stand-up comedy course with Comedy Asylum that Rob runs. It was about 6 weeks, and because I have a mental health condition myself, it was a really good forum, and basically we were told to just sort of write something and try and perform it. And I did that, and we got to perform at the Exchange bar in Leicester in front of a crowd. So for a lot of us, perhaps we hadn't done that before, so that was really good. And then I tried a bit of stand-up myself, but as the other comedians will attest, it is hard work, and you have to put in the graft to try your act and go to lots of venues, etc., all over the place. And because I am a single parent and I have bipolar, I just couldn't do it. So then I thought, when you have those ideas, I think having looked at and experienced some comedy venues and clubs, that I'm going to set up a comedy club myself with no experience, just an idea. So in September 2018, I had no comedy contacts really, so I put together a lineup of all women, and people came, and it's been going since then really. So it's and I've learned a lot during the, about myself, about public speaking, about marketing, about organising and things like that. So it has improved myself, and also I have enjoyed it, and it has largely been something that has given me a lot of pleasure. So so that's my story.
I got into it through punk rock. When I was a teenager, I fronted a punk rock band with a rather dubious name. Feel free to ask me later on. I think professional decorum would be forbid me from revealing the name of the band. And the chat between the songs just kept getting longer, to the point where the other three were getting a bit bored of it. And so I was doing poetry for years, like performance poetry. And it was an agent who I knew, a comedy agent, who had this idea, and this is how I left nursing essentially in my early 30s. She had this idea of pairing me up with a musician and putting us in the clubs on the comedy circuit. And we spent 5 years, really filthy songs. It was very much the lower end of the comedy club spectrum. And we as a double act, you're on half everyone else's wages. You'll get 2 hotel rooms each, but there's no dispensation, which is why there aren't many double acts knocking around on the circuit these days. So we packed it in about just over 10 years ago. And so these days, I suppose strictly speaking, it's not it's certainly not. I think the best description now, it's stand-up poetry. So it's like stand-up comedy, but it rhymes and there's no jokes in it.
So it's a bit like my comedy, only it rhymes. Jack?
I started doing stand-up comedy when I was at De Montfort University in 2009. And I'd always been interested in it before that. I'd listened to it a lot, but I had no kind of desire to do it. It was just something that I liked. And then while at De Montfort, there was a stand-up comedy society there, and so I was 19 and did my first gig. And then I really stopped caring about university hugely. I just carried on gigging from there. I got a tutu, which I was the first one in my whole family to go to university, so I set the bar nice and low for everyone else. And just carried on doing it, and that's why I've ended up there working all these different jobs, and started it in Leicester, moved back to Cambridgeshire, carried on doing it around there, and then came back here. Leicester's really, really handy, I think we all know, for being in the middle of the country to get about everywhere. And also, started, I did 6 years going up to the Edinburgh Fringe, and then hadn't been up for 6 years, so I went last year, which was really, really great to go back up there. But took until 2019 to go self-employed with it, and I've worked all these different jobs. I've worked at Leicester College for 3 months, worked at special needs schools, all the while just trying to find any kind of job that will have me and not get in the way of doing my comedy. And so as soon as it starts getting in the way, I just leave, much to my own detriment, I suppose. But
So it sounds like it's been a few kind of ups and downs, a little bit of an emotional roller coaster for you at times.
Oh, very good, Bruce. I believe that was in the script.
Yes, that was.
That lovely segue. I think for pushing yourself, and I do wish I went self-employed sooner and be freelance, because you're so in charge of it, and it's such an incentive for what you're doing. And then I think also with stand-up it might be the same for all of us here, really, because of how accessible and relatable it is. It seems quite easy to do, and that's also why I think you get somewhat exploited, because it is essentially you're just getting up and talking, and you look like you want to just do it for fun. And then And then originally you do just want to do it for fun, and then it becomes your job, and you're trying to earn more money, and then the whole stress of like, am I any good at this? Because it's the only, I suppose also for me, like where doing it self-employed has allowed me to get so much better at it, whatever that means. But then I was always struggling with getting any good at it and progressing and taking certain opportunities because I was always having to work. When I worked at Leicester College, it was 9 till 5, and then I'd finish work and drive to like Bournemouth, and then come back and go to work the next day. And I just started taking Sertraline at the time, and I would like fall asleep at my desk while I was there. But I was only on the marketing department, so it was fine. I wasn't like a teacher or anything like that. Yeah.
What about yourself? What about the ups and downs of showbiz?
Yeah, I suppose when it goes badly, you learn from it, and when it goes well, it inspires you. So you can't miss, if you look at it like that. But I think we've all had that moment on stage where it feels a bit like drowning, and that's almost spiritual. I think for me, a huge milestone, in fact, was when I just started doing like comedy, unpaid comedy spots, but in the middle of your Bear Pit comedy clubs. And I was 20 at the time, and it was a massacre each time I did it. And I remember getting booed off in Nottingham in January and missing the last train home and spending the night, under that the stairs in the concourse in Nottingham where the platforms are, it's that staircase, and I spent the night under there, and it was frost. And I remember two policemen came and asked what I was doing there, and I told him, and said, well, you can stay here, but don't make any noise. What am I going to do? And I spent the night. The first train back was at about 5 a.m, something like that. And I spent the night with my notebook, sort of scribbling my set out, working out what hadn't worked, why it hadn't worked, what could be better, And it was when I was on the train back feeling rather knackered, and I realised at no point in that moment had I thought about packing it in. And that was a bit of a milestone for me, as I thought, well, how could it possibly? It can't get worse than that. How wrong I was. But at that moment, I thought, if I'm going to pack it in, now's the time, and I don't feel like packing it in. So
there's a phrase where someone said, James Cook, you might know, is brilliant, but he was like a lot of professional comedians are people who forgot to quit. You just kept on doing it.
Yeah.
And like the idea of like toying around with quitting, and just from a bad gig sometimes isn't enough.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think as well, a lot of comedians, they might not know it, but I think the more experienced ones are inherently good. In fact, you probably know more about this than me, Bruce, given your background, but I think a lot of experienced, particularly stand-ups, are really good at stuff like mindfulness, because my understanding is, and it's not huge, is that the whole point of mindfulness is to mitigate or interrupt those negative narratives that we all have, that can spiral very easily. And so when you're less experienced and you're on stage and it's not going very well, it's very easy for that internal monologue to sort of tell you, well, you're not very good, they're not laughing, you're proving how rubbish you are, and it becomes true and blah, blah, blah. But I think when you're more experienced, you're more likely to think, no, that didn't work, let's try this one. No, okay, let's try a bit of that. That's a bit better. You don't have time to tell yourself a story. You just, you are very much in the moment of you're only as good as your next joke.
Yeah, I think it was Sarah Millican who's got a rule that basically says if you have a good gig, you can celebrate that. You can go on about how great you are, how wonderful a comedian you are, until you get home and sleep on it, and then the next day you wake up and start again. And it's exactly the same with a bad gig. You're allowed to dwell on it for a certain amount of time, for the amount of time it is useful, and then just let it go.
I'm a fan of a 24-hour long wallow. I think as long as it's time limited, a good shameless wallow is all right.
Yeah, everyone's allowed one every now and again.
Yeah, just as a treat.
Yeah. Judith, how about yourself? What about your ups and downs?
I think as someone that runs comedy nights, it's finding venues that get having an all-female lineup, because that's still quite unusual. Or just diversity, basically, in all its forms. So I recently, I started working at the YMCA in Leicester, and they've got a great theatre there, Leicester's oldest surviving theatre, but they also have a foyer. And one of the comedians that performed on my night at the start of the festival says she's performed at many foyers before, And what we need to do to get to the theatre is to smash the patriarchy, and then we'll be allowed in the theatre. You know? So I'll be doing foyers for a bit longer. But to be at the Y Theatre, they're very professional. They've got employed staff on to set up and help you. Whereas my experience generally is you can turn up at you know, rooms at the back of pubs, and you've got to set up the chairs, and the mic doesn't work, or you know, type thing. So you've got to sort of just go with that, and you don't feel always particularly welcomed. Whereas at the Y, you know, there's lighting. They put a special curtain up for me. It's tickled pink. They put pink lighting up. You know, it's like they've got a sound technician. You know, and it's brilliant. So it's kind of you get buzz out of people recognising that what you're doing has value, and so I'm at that stage where I did take my show to 21 Soho in London last year, and it was really good. But being in London, it's a big venue. You're just one of many, many, many shows, like the Y is, but you don't get that sort of special treatment. So it's great being in London, and you see all these people are coming to your show, but you're not left with a great aftertaste, you know. Whereas at the Y, I kind of think they asked me, will I come again? You know, I'm like, yeah, you know, this feels like this could be the home of Tickled Pink. Whereas I've been sort of a bit nomadic, just going, please let me perform here, you know. But so that's not been easy, but it's been good. Like other people that performed on my night, who performed many times, asking me when the next gig is or whatever. So they kind of push me on when I think about, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard, because you know, we have to organise the venue, the lineup, and everything. But if things are made slightly easier somewhere, because the venue's completely on board, then it just makes things much better.
Yeah.
So.
When you were talking about the difficulty in getting venues to kind of buy into what you're doing with Tickled Pink, and the expectations and the pressures that go along with that, do you find that you feel those expectations, whether they're good or bad, or do you find that's a pressure?
I feel like we should be lying down, Bruce, when you're talking to us. That's so low.
Well, no, you shouldn't.
I think I need to call my mum, actually. Apologise.
Once you start paying me 50 quid, that's when we do that. But yeah, what do you reckon about those expectations, those pressures? Do you think you find you get those differently from other comedians?
Other comedians?
Yeah.
Do you mean who perform on my night? Do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, you know, with all female lineups and the reactions that can provoke in venues, in audiences. Do you find that as a different kind of pressure?
I think again it links into, like at the Y, people seem to love it. You get mainly women in the audience, but there are some men as well. Everyone's welcome, but no pressure really. I think because when I first started out, and I didn't really know any comedians, and people approach you and they send you a 5-minute set of what they've done on a video clip, I was sort of saying yes to everyone, you know, initially. And that's fine, because I still want people to come on my night that haven't got much experience. Or sometimes I just think, look, you seem really keen, do 5 minutes, doesn't matter. Comedy shows are good when you've got a mixture of, that was really good, or I'm not sure about them, type thing. So so I just think I got better at finding out, because you've also got to find comedians that are reliable, that will, you know, they turn up on time, they turn up at the right venue, you know, all kind of things. So so I think it's been about building up a reputation. Like, is it good to come on my night? That some comedians will tell other comedians, and so it goes on. And I learn what's good. Like the YMCA is very close to the train station, so in terms of safety, it's you can walk easily. Whereas in my experience as a stand-up comedian, I think it doesn't matter who you are. Walking around the streets of a foreign, you know, a UK city at night is not always a pleasant experience on your own, you know. So it's that's you know thinking about that sometimes, or Make it easy as possible for comedians to come on my night. So but I, still learning, but it's, I've been doing it. This is my 5th year, and it just takes a long time, doesn't it? Initially, nobody's like, "Who are you? What are you doing?
Yeah.
What's this about?" type thing. And then gradually, like, I got that nomination at the Leicester Comedy Festival in 2021, and that was good. Didn't win it, but
It usually helps being able to put nominee on there.
Oh
as well,
yeah. It sort of elevates you a bit. So,
Yeah.
but you just have to put in the work. Yeah.
There's loads and loads of acts that I know that sometimes either stop completely or it's the travel side of it and also meeting new people if you're particularly nervous. I think because I love the travel side of it, but sometimes I end up getting slightly financially exploited for it, especially when I was new. I would drive to Devon and back for no money to go do it, but I know so many people who say, "Oh God, I've got to go over this place. I've never been there before," and there's so many posts as well for "Can you get here? Public transport's awful." And and can you share a car with this other person that you don't know? And so it just puts off so many people. I also run nights. You've done
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
haven't you? Comedy and cocktails at Manhattan, 34 opposite the Exchange. I get so stressed out with the promoting side that almost makes me not want to bother at all. And I think it's the pressure of acts coming from elsewhere to your night, and I suppose it's the same for hosting a party, I guess, in a way where, oh God, have I wasted everyone's time coming here? And it's not at any point that I think I'm bad at being a comedian. I'm just not a very good promoter. But then it is infuriating when there are venues who I think sometimes see stand-up as they're doing you a favour by putting on the night. When it's well, no, Comedy Festival's a really good example of it, where even the other day, I shouldn't really say, but one of the venues. So downstairs, at one of the venues, there was 85 people downstairs, and the bar upstairs decided to shut the bar. And just why? Why have you done this? And so then it will just have this circle of, they're just well, we're not really making much money from the stand-up and whatever. But then places like, you've done one at the Old Horse, haven't you? The Laughter Loft in Ayleston, if anyone's ever been, it's great there. They're Alan and Sarah there are so supportive and so amazing and just make you feel very welcome, and they'll book taxis for acts to get back and forth from the train station. So yeah, when you do find a venue that's really supportive, it's lovely. Really nice.
Yeah. Sorry, that question was about pressure and expectations that you feel as comedians, and you've both talked about the pressure and expectation you feel for other people to have a good time, that's rather lovely, isn't it? It is.
It definitely also comes with time, and I think a lot of people stop doing it if they get too stressed out. One of the first ones I ever did, have you ever been to the comedy nights at the Kayal restaurant? So you can go there, and they do gong shows. So when you first start doing comedy, how can we make this better? Add an element of the audience can tell you when to go. They're not enjoying you, so they can tell you when to go. But they're quite good for when you're starting, because it teaches you how to do a short, punchy 5-minute set. And also, I guess there's an element of you do need to deal with certain things. And down the line, it kind of never stops. I did a gig not long ago in a boxing ring. But I kind of, with what you're saying, with the mindfulness and stuff like that, you have to teach yourself. A lot of the time I tell myself, it's I'm choosing to do this. And when you get anyone being very demanding, it's but you chose to do this. And so I can't get too upset that I'm in a boxing ring because they told me I was going to be in a boxing ring. There wasn't a fight going on. There was a fight and they left, and then I was in the ring, and it was just completely pointless doing it. But it was £300 cash, so I'll do it. And the amount of places I will go for £300 cash. But with the one at the Kayal, I still think about him all the time. There was a guy there, and he was shadow boxing before we went on. Doing all that. It's just a 5-minute thing. It's you've got to calm down. Then he went up, and do I need to tell you we got gonged off? Of course he did. He was shadowboxing before he went up, and so he get gonged off. And so as he left, he punched the door, so it swung open, and I've never seen him again. But that, like, as a a way to get into comedy, it's like you've got to jump through this, you've got to jump through this, and the whole reason why, if you've ever done like the promoter will only book you if you win one of his gong shows. So what a horror, and that's not true, and I know it's not true because he'll book like really big names. It's like Rod Gilbert's not done one of your gong shows, and so like it's this kind of like putting loads of pressure on yourself to be good, but then you kind of just mellow out and just I am enjoying this. I'm choosing to do this. I do want to get ahead, but it's not like a race at the same time.
I've got to say, I agree with you about gong shows. They are a fantastic way just to really hone that fine 30 seconds.
Some places give you a 2 minutes grace,
Yeah.
Bruce. What? Did you not even get the 2 minutes grace?
I just made that up.
Get off. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I did the Manchester one, I did 2 minutes 15, which 2 minutes grace period, so technically only 15 seconds. But someone drove from Sunderland and got gonged off immediately. But
Can I just mention, talking about comedians getting access to gigs, I saw a comedian the other day that's been on my comedy night many times online during the pandemic. And I met her in person for the first time, saw her whip show, it's brilliant, and she said she had to go to another gig. I take her to that gig because she's like, it's at 6:30 at night, or 6:45 at night in Leicester. Is there a bus to such and such in Leicester? You know what buses are like, you can't, they finish at 5 o'clock or something. And so I took her to this pub. So this is a typical pub in a fairly white British area. She's wearing a hijab, and we go to the front door, and she goes, "Is there another entrance?" And we go around the back, So she said, she can't. In the past, she's had experience of people trying to pull off a hijab or things like that, where she gets slurs. So it just really pulled me up in terms of I would feel comfortable walking into that pub and going out the back that way, but she was like, "No, can we go another way?" And it was quite shocking because we all experience different ways that we can access venues or all sorts of experiences, and it isn't the same as other people, is it? Necessarily. So I think she says there's only one other comedian like her that's wearing a hijab in the comedy circuit in the UK. So it's kind of, she's brilliant, but she's really feels alone, I think, in terms of understanding, I suppose. But she's really, really good.
Yeah.
So she's very fierce and very, she wants to make a difference. But at the same time, she has to be concerned about her safety,
it's so easy to take it for granted as well. Like when I was booking Comedy Cocktails as an act from Liverpool, and you try and book acts to come together, but I can pick up one girl, and so I was like, "Oh, would you be able to share a lift with this guy?" And she was like, "I know him, but no, I'm not doing that." Whereas a lot of the time you just think, it's like, "Yeah, just get in the car together, it's totally fine." But I completely forgot to try and always consider those kind of things there as well, and just I suppose also, I guess the up and down thing that you're talking about as well, from like a chemical level, there is a lot of that going on as well, like the highs and the lows, and that's sometimes why it is quite nice gigging at least 2 hours away from home, because the drive home it kind of wears off. Whereas there's been times where I've done the Just the Tonic one on a Saturday in Leicester, and I've just gone autopilot, and I think especially since I stopped drinking, and so I just go home, and I was in bed at 10:30, like on a Saturday, just tucked up in bed like that, but I still had all the gig finishes at 10, just walk straight home, but you've still got all the energy of even like you get used to it and stuff, but I think I definitely get more of a rush from a really bad gig. I had one in Leeds not long ago, and it was just awful, but I was laughing my head off the whole way home because of how bad it was. There was a guy trying to coach me through it on the front row, being like, "You're doing okay." It's like, "I know I'm doing okay. This has nothing to do with you. It's just a lot of coked up people here in Leeds right now who shouldn't come to comedy." But then you go home, and I was just like that of how daft it was.
I don't know about you lot, but I find that a good gig will keep me awake at night much more than a bad gig will.
I don't know.
I don't know. I think I've been doing it for so depressingly long. It's going, oh, that went well.
Yeah.
Days, you know.
My
that
mum
did go
can't
well.
understand when I come home from a gig and I stay at my mum's sometimes, and I come home, she's like, how was it? I was like, oh yeah, it was fine.
Yeah.
And she's like, what do you like? It seems like a lot of effort, Jack, just for fine. But she's like, well, Mum, how was your day at work? Yeah, it was all right. Well, Mum, what's the point then?
I mean,
everything can't be awesome. Either people want to hear about awesome ones or horrible ones. Like, no one ever wants. But most of the time,
the 85%
you want
that are in
you
the,
want fine to get through it, and but no, I don't know. Like, it's all. I suppose there's loads of stuff to do with how lonely it is, and because you have this great moment, you're there with the crowd, and then suddenly you're back home in your car, usually like eating rubbish in your car sometimes, just suddenly so alone. When I won English Comedian of the Year, I think all the other acts stayed in London, and I was getting the tube back, the train back home, and so I had to get home and then to Huntingdon and then drive home from that, and I was just like, oh, I've got no one to enjoy this with at all. So I wound down my windows while I was driving back and went, woohoo! And then just back to nothing. But and then I think I had work the next day from it. So just back to nothing. You can't really share.
I did a gig in Weston-super-Mare, which I didn't get to see it in the day really, and it was in sort of November time. And the venue organiser was really helpful, and he booked me a hotel, and it was kind of the hotels that have seen better days in Weston-super-Mare. But so it was weird. I was on my own. I don't know if I got the Wi-Fi to work, but the painted wallpaper, flowery wallpaper, and that. But just a flashback in time. But I was on my own in Weston-super-Mare, a long way from home. All the acts had gone because they were quite local, so that did feel a bit weird.
You have to find that balance of being prepared to be on your own. I almost quite love it now, of having that time. But then I think it's just that rush and then nothing. And someone did a thing the other day. Great guy, Duncan Oakley from Nottingham, is so much fun. Talking about the amount of times that when you're closing gigs, a lot of the time you're the last one. All the other acts go home, and so it's just you and maybe the compere, and that's it. And so all the fun chat and the camaraderie in comedy is great, and especially when you were doing the stuff with Ian a lot of the time. I never did club smashing, Bruce, which is unacceptable at this point. This is what this whole thing is actually about, right? Okay, this is a sting operation on Bruce for why didn't you put me for the club smashing? But because it's so much fun, and the friends who I started doing comedy with are still but there is an element as well where comedians sometimes are my favourite and least favourite people to hang out with.
The conversations can get quite narrow. The Canadians do a lovely thing with their fringe festivals, which are a totally different model to, say, the Adelaide or Edinburgh model, which is more like a trade fair than a fringe, if we're honest. In that you invest a certain amount of money, quite a lot of money often, in the hope that it fills your diary. Whereas the Canadian fringes, you, if it goes well, you can make a lot of money, but it won't fill your diary. But it's like summer camp for people that are old enough to know better. But what the Canadians do is there's a lot of good. It's Canada, so there's a lot of goodwill. This is on the subject of being on your own post show and all that. The Canadians will billet you. You'll get billeted by volunteers, and they've got this really thoughtful process where whoever billets performers, they get free show tickets and all the rest of it, and we get free accommodation. But the potential billeters and the artists all fill out a questionnaire which asks stuff like, are you a bigot? Do you have a problem with same-sex couples? How do you feel about smoking? Do you like to go out and party? Are you in at 9 o'clock reading? And they match you up with your billet. It's a weird. It's a very.
We've got a homophobe and a gay couple living together.
And so, luckily we've got a bigoted performer. We found something to stay in this minute. And so it's lovely. So you go home post show, and it's I've done 15 Canadian tours. In fact, I've not had a single billet I've not got on with, and that's definitely not about my social skills. That's about that. But what I did discover was when I was touring Canada, say in my early 30s, and this is related to what you said about on your own, big ugly bloke, mid-30s, they'd always give you the sort of the DOS hole, you always get the crack den at the end of the street, you know. But I discovered that if I was touring with my 6-year-old daughter, I'd get a little old lady who lived in a big place with swimming pool and cats, and it was just brilliant. So I took her out with me for 3 summers doing that for the quality of the billet. Yeah.
Cool. Here's another question for you. We talked a lot about what it's like out travelling to all these places, talking to different people. What's it like actually being on stage? Do you find that you kind of have to put a mask on? Do you find that you have to become a different character when you kind of get on that stage?
For me, right, so it's rarely I get nervous these days. You're certainly more focused, I think, but it's not. So there's a certain fight-flight element goes on, but you wouldn't describe it as nerves or stage fright unless it's if it's your first run of a Fringe and you know there's 3 reviewers in, then you might, because that could make or break what's going to happen over the, but generally, or I think when it's at its nicest, it feels like coming home to family, you know, and a lot of Canadian audiences do feel a bit like that as well. So that, and that's quite nice, but it's, I do have one thing that I've tried to sort of address and I've failed, whereby I think the me on stage is very similar to the me off stage. I'm just, and quite often I'm chatting with someone in conversation and I am just being me, and somebody go, well, it feels like you're performing at me, and I'm pretty sure I'm not, but because they've seen me on stage, I think they've got the chicken and the egg confused with each other, if you know what I mean. So yeah, me on stage is very... I think that it's definitely the difference between doing an hour-long show and doing a 20-minute set. That when you're doing an hour, you get it's got a whole different rhythm that you get into, and even if it's not going well, you're a lot more at home on there than say if you're doing like the early days when you're doing 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
Do you tell it yourself? Do you find that you kind of have a little mask, a little character that you put on when you step on that stage?
Well, what I've tended to do now is I used to MC my shows, but I then saw how it's properly done. You know, as in really working the audience, and so I have a regular MC now. So I'm only on stage really at the end where I thank the audience, but I'm there to meet and greet people as well. So yeah, I think I definitely have. Like people say to me, I don't know how you do it, Judith, you know, I don't know how you get up on stage, you know, type thing. And I'm like, well, it is just practice, because initially I was a lot more nervous, didn't know what I was doing, but now being more experienced, therapy, you know, has helped, and taking the meds, and you know, it all helps really. So I would say that I don't put on a mask, but I'm more comfortable in me, and I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
There's an element of well, no, where you're saying you don't MC your own nights, and I'm trying to say this in as a complimentary way as possible, where there are some people. Yeah. You ready, Bruce? There are some people though who there's because they run the night, but sometimes they're like the weakest part of the night, but they refuse to let someone else do it.
Right.
So in a way, if you're like, no, I've seen how people MC it, that's much better than what I can do at the moment. But there are some comedy nights that you might go to, and just like, this MC is so bad, like it's infuriating.
Yeah.
And yeah, it just kind of goes on and on and on. And when you are hosting it, you do get carried away, I think sometimes, like it's my night, it's my show, I can do whatever I want. But yeah, if you're not doing, there's like, it's quite rude of me, I think, sometimes there are comedians where I go up to Edinburgh and I want to tell people they can go home. We're like, you don't need to be here anymore.
We can save you 10 grand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and with, like, what was the question, Bruce? Sorry.
Do you find that you have to kind of put a mask on, become a different person?
I think definitely when you first start, and yeah, totally with that first like 5 minutes, the way you do comedy, no one talks like that, and definitely over time, I don't know whether it was a bad review, but someone said, Jack, you are the most like yourself off and on stage, and I don't know whether that's like a backhanded compliment, depending on how much they like me.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables to pin down there.
And it's like, and that's my goal of trying to be as much like yourself as you can And of course, yeah, you don't talk in that kind of rhythm when you're doing stand-up at all. But like, I guess when I first started, there would be an element of who I was influenced by, and you start mimicking that. There's it goes through phases, especially in the UK scene, where a lot of people will say into like Stuart Lee, and so you get a lot of comedians copying that rhythm. I was really into lots of American comics, so sometimes I would catch little like bits from them, and then even the other acts you gig with a lot, you start getting carried away with some of them. But it's definitely not a... There's always a tiny bit, but I'm trying to get as close to myself as I can, and there's a word for when I teach stand-up courses as well, like of harnessing the energy of a conversation, but you're doing all of the work, but you're not just talking at them. You're kind of like waiting for the pauses, people jump in and stuff. And there is, a certain bit of science to it. But yeah, like when people think like, it's quite fun to do a bit, and I always tell people, it's like, this is a bit that I'm doing, and then you go into it and stuff. But yeah, when some people are like, oh, you feel like you're performing at me. But then if they catch you just after a show, of course,
you're in that mode.
You're in that mindset beforehand. Yeah. But, I'm not someone... It was Ian who used to work with, where he said he, attempted to grab the tannoy at a supermarket and do a 5-minute set on the supermarket just to get in the rhythm of it or whatever. But, it all depends what you do. Like, stuff like this, you kind of want to be as close to yourself as you can. But then whenever I listen back to myself on certain things when I've done the radio, and I suppose with comedy as well, people want you... They see you as hey, you're just going to be silly all the time. But then when you're doing something for LAMP or like mental health ones, of course I'm going to be talking in a serious way. I don't want to be joking. And it's the same when you get comedians on podcasts, but you also get comedians being used in all these different ways all the time because of how accessible it is, but how many different layers and levels there are, rather than having... I think it's an easy in as well. So having an expert, and then you have a comedian who's kind of definitely not an expert, but a nice intermediate jump between everything.
Yeah. Got another question that I'd be very interested to hear, particularly from you, Rob. We've got this kind of stereotype of the tormented creative genius in this country. And, do you find that is annoying? Do you find that that's useful? How does that kind of...
I have an opinion on this, Bruce. Yeah. Yes, it's annoying, yeah. I think in terms of mental health, and I've worked in mental health since I was 17. I got paid for going to sleep when I was 17. I took a job doing sleepover shifts in a care home, and you'd smoke fags and eat beans all day and go to bed. It was great. I thought, oh, this is the future, and then someone told me this is called nursing. So, right, okay. And so over the years, I think we've come a really long way in addressing stigma in mental health. The axe-wielding nutter stereotype isn't nearly as prevalent as it was. I think there's a long way to go. And I think the tormented, particularly in comedy, the tormented, messed up comic stereotype, it's not as unpleasant or as damaging as the axe-wielding nutter stereotype, but it's still nonsense. It's still actually doing the clubs, doing the circuit. It's you need to have your life together, to be at a different place every evening, to handle it emotionally when it doesn't go well, to manage your finances, to do all this kind of stuff. And so I think a lot of us have found that dressing rooms are actually full of very supportive, together people with generally happy lives. But people are fascinated with this idea, to the degree that I knew at least one comedian who every time he did a gig, he was telling the audience about his bipolar condition, and I smelt a rat. do you know what I mean? And on conversation with him, it was quickly, backstage conversation, it was quickly apparent this wasn't true. But to the point that he'd sort of self-diagnosed himself, because he feels a little bit, because he gets highs and lows in mood. And that's like me, right, if I don't eat, I get hangry, right? And everyone confuses it with a proper emotion, right? And then that's like me going, well, I've got diabetes, I'm not going to take my insulin, I don't believe in it, well, maybe I'm just hangry now. So I think it is a stereotype. There's always going to be people like Robin Williams or whoever that you can point to mount a counter-argument. And often if I do anything with the media, they're asking about you know, or comedy, mental health, and that's seen as the thing that the creative genius stereotype. I do think it's nonsense because it ignores the truism that any of us can have a mental health episode at any stage in our lives, given a rubbish enough set of circumstances. And if lots of rubbish circumstances amalgamate and come at you together, it becomes a lot more likely. This isn't to say there isn't a connection between creativity and mental health for all sorts of reasons I'll eventually document in novel form, but I do think that creative, tormented, genius, comedy, comedian thing, we need to be careful of that.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to receive counter-arguments.
It is the case of like absolutely normalising it. I think comedians are probably closer to snooker players than we're far, because you're on your own a lot. If you don't do well, you probably won't get more bookings.
Yeah.
And there are loads of snooker. I do want to do a show about it.
I'd have to do it under pressure.
Under pressure, you've got to be
yeah.
mentally prepared, mentally focused.
Yeah.
But then also there's the issue at the moment, like this might end up talking about like be a snooker panel after this, but like where I can't remember the guy. There's a Scottish one, Graham Dott, and he had a lot of mental health issues. And yeah, because you are on your own, you're travelling around. But then there's also a load of snooker players at the bottom, and same for comedy, where you don't earn enough money, so you can't practice it all that much to get any better. But then what else can you do? You've got to find this balance all the time. But yeah, like it is disappointing when there's the same thing with loads of people like, oh, I'm a bit OCD. And it's like, I think most people I've not ever met anyone who's like, oh, I love mess. Like no one loves. I love mess. Like we love chaos. Chaos is discipline. Yeah, you would think like but the same for like me, where I'm like quite. And what you're saying like with the finances of it. And I think when I compare myself the other way, whereas a lot of my friends think it's like amazing what I do, but it's like, you're married and you own a house. I live with a 45-year-old called Colin, who I don't think knows I'm there.
You didn't meet him on the Canadian fringe.
It's like, I'm not married, I don't have any kids, I don't have any of that, but I'm doing what I want. But I suppose also, it massively helps being more on top of stuff. Yeah. And you can be, I think especially when I first started, and enjoying the going out drinking and that, it was much more of a camaraderie thing, and then you kind of move away from that and be like, no, this is my job now, and I want this to be my job as much as I can. I love talking about mental health on stage and my own things with it and meeting other people. I think it's so much more funny. There's really great ones. All of these ones are American. Maria Bamford, who's amazing, talking about, she's been in psych wards and stuff. Gary Goldman did a new show recently called The Great Depression, about his time in a psych ward, because he was really prevalent and then he disappeared because he was in a psych ward. And then Paul F. Tompkins has a bit about therapy, and Paul F. Tompkins is one of my favourites, where he talks about when comedians talk about therapy, or even people talk about therapy, it can be a bit like, ugh. And so he's like, I don't want to talk about therapy any more than you want to hear me talk about therapy. But when people start saying, it's like, oh, my therapist said this to me, it's like, I don't think your therapist is trying to get messages to me through you. And just how it's private, but then it is this thing of like, it should be like such an open, fun platform. And it is still like a piece of theatre at the end of the day, where a comedian who I will not name, but I will say used to host the Big Break, and where with going up to Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is such a good example, and the same with the Tickle Pig shows. It's such a good thing to talk about a really serious issue, and some of the best stuff like Nanette, and these ones with Mike Birbiglia is great for it as well, but where the former host of Big Break was like, why do you have to go up to Edinburgh and do a show? Why can't you just go up there and do some jokes? And I was like, well, because it's quite boring. Yeah. Really, go up and tell a story about what's been going on with you, and some of the most well-received things that we all love, and it's got an element of like the human condition in there, rather than just like, here's some jokes about my mother-in-law for an hour. 5 stars.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you get asked a lot about comedians' mental health. I think if there's one profession that we should talk about of having a correlation with mental health problem, it's teaching. As a nurse, when I was on the acute wards, we nursed more teachers than every other profession by a long way. so there's plenty of really great comedians out there who have experience of mental health conditions and who talk about them and do it in a really inventive way. If you go in any school, you'll find a lot of people on antidepressants. You'll find a lot of people. Do you know what I mean? It really is one occupation that can probably spit you out. But Radio Leicester will never ask me about that because it's not interesting.
No.
It's the comedians that are interesting. And I think it's a shame, really.
They're worried about apps like, it's like you're bumming out our viewers, our listeners. It's like, well, some of them are probably teachers. It's like when I worked at the special needs school, and I had to eventually give it up because if team teach and having to restrain children safely. So I would do that all day on this 8-year-old boy. It was his birthday. It wasn't just some random kid. We knew doing that all day, and he's crying. But it's you're taught to do it because it's for his own safety and everyone else's safety. He broke a member of staff's finger by grabbing the phone and whacking it on a random stuff like that. And then after that, I've got to go to a gig. And in my head, I'm and it was got way too much for me. So I was just I'd rather stop doing that and struggle financially than keep coming in. And and it is really, really tough. And I suppose it's the almost the hopelessness sometimes with it of trying to go in all the time. But I would prefer the teaching to working in the market department in an office. That's more, I think, soul destroying. That's probably where my mental health was at its lowest there, because I just felt useless. This is so unimportant what we're doing, whereas working with these kids, as much as I'd get a shoe thrown in my face.
But at least you're part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Yes, exactly. And I'd rather have a shoe thrown in my face every day than having to contact anyone. Yes.
You gave you permission.
Yes.
I've got one more question, but I'm really aware that we're running out of time quite a lot, because it's been really, really nice talking to you. It's been really, really nice hearing about all this. But we have gone on quite a lot. Maybe now would be a good time to just have a quick word about LAMP. What do we reckon? Would now be a good time?
Yes.
Yeah. One of the reasons that we're here.
Thank you. Cool.
Yeah.
Again, thank you guys for doing this. So, my name is Matt, and I work for the charity LAMP, which stands for Leicestershire Action for Mental Health Project. And one of the reasons, obviously, why I wanted to put this kind of on today is because, obviously, mental health surrounds us, and everything about us is mental health, and it's so important to think that when people are on stage. And they're actually real people, or people in business. When you're you're in a marketing department and you're all business, and you're working. People are people, and like I said, that's why I really wanted to kind of put this today to show that there are people behind that stage, and that there are is a vulnerable place to position in. But as a charity, we specialise in mental health advocacy, so navigating people through the mental health system, so empowering people to speak up. So if it's a case of that they're given medication and they don't want medication. It's a case of empowering them to say, no, I want to explore other options. If someone doesn't feel like they have a voice in their care, that we can help them, raise their voice and tell them when something's not right, and be by the side of them during an appointment, maybe to explain the expectations of what that appointment might be. It might be to actually explain what is the next step, because a lot of people go through the GPs and then they kind of say, now you need to refer yourself on, and then you just put on a waiting list, and then you referred from a system to another system, and you've actually, after 6 months of being on the mental health system, you actually haven't got any help at all because you've just been passed around. And it's kind of empowering someone to say, this isn't right, I need some help right now. And it just stops people falling through the cracks of an overburdened system, and we just make sure that we're there for individuals to empower them to speak up when the care that they're trying to get isn't helping, and that's basically what LAMP is about. So yes, thank you, and hope you can support us.
So I've got one more question. Like I said, we are running a little bit. I was hoping there'd be a bit of time for questions and answers afterwards. Has anyone got to be anywhere after this? Are we okay to overrun by a few minutes? Yeah? Cool. So my last question for everybody is basically about the positives that comedy gives you for your own mental health. I didn't say this at the start, but the reason that I actually started doing stand-up in the first place was because I was absolutely terrified of talking in public. And I was drunk in a bar one night, and a friend said to me, I'm starting a comedy night just for new acts, starting in a couple of months. you should give it a go, you're a funny guy. And because I was drunk, I went, yes, I'll do that, forgetting that I had this terrible fear. And when I sobered up the next day, it was like, and I spent 2 months basically going, and I was really lucky because I did that first gig, and it went really well, and all of a sudden I was kind of cured, really. So for me, comedy has had such a massive impact on my mental health, on my own confidence. I'd just like to hear anything you'd like to share about that, Judith.
Yeah, you know, I was saying how much pleasure it brings me. I think having pleasure and joy in our lives is so important, isn't it? Things that, you know, give us some things we can look forward to and things that make us happy. So I know that despite the sort of trials and tribulations of putting on a night, actually when it arrives, when the date arrives, and I can sit back and welcome people on and the comedians do their thing and it goes well, it's such a good feeling. And it sort of gives me a little high, you know, not too great a one, but you know. But it is, and meeting people, I'm a social person, I've become more that way, and so it's nice meeting new people, and because being a comedy sort of promoter and producer, you have to sort of network a bit, so you have to have confidence of talking to different people, and so I think it's just widened my world a lot, which has been really good.
Awesome. Jack?
I think you're like similar to when you first start as well. It's always lovely starting in a supportive environment. Was it at Lions at High School?
It was, yeah.
And so I started at uni where it's really lovely. I can't imagine the idea of having to start doing a gig at like a gong show or something like that. It's your first gig and it's really like brutal. But I think because it becomes so much part of your life and when it becomes your job, it took me a long time, and I guess also because I started so young, to start kind of taking it seriously. So like, it's only been the last year that I stopped drinking, because the amount of times you're around alcohol, a lot of people offer you, they still do it as well, of being like, we can't give you any money, but we'll give you a beer. So just give me the money for the beer. Like instead, why do I need to have a beer for it? And so I think it's, in a way, I'm slightly grateful for the time over COVID, because that's really sharpened me up a lot and made me miss stand-up, and know that like this is what I want to be doing. And like, I guess, like having like years and years of doing the stand-up but not looking after myself at all, and just kind of treating it as an odd sort of hobby, but I was good at it, but I was kind of like floating around. But then when I fully committed to it, and then also like committed to myself, in the Edinburgh show that I did about working at a testing centre, I do talk about like calling up the hospital and wanting to be like taken away, but that was also a mix of COVID and like being at these testing centres, and they weren't like very pleasant environments at all. But there's other nice things over that time where I read loads and loads of books over COVID, because at the testing centres I basically got paid to do nothing, so I'd sit and read books all the time. Thank you NHS, I'm a hero. And where I read Jog On by Bella Mackie, which is great. It really helped me learn to understand my own depression and when I'm going to go into depressive mode, the kind of things that I'm doing, and just to keep on top of it. And it's because I never really knew what was going on before, and so now I'm a lot better of like, I'm being quite horrible to myself. Like, not nip it, but just be aware that I'm probably gonna have a little moment. And it taught me loads of stuff of, like, I get tendinitis in my knees and my ankles, and like what you're saying about mental health, that's just, I'm always gonna have that.
Yeah.
But it's gonna get worse if I run without stretching.
Yeah.
And so I have to stretch my mind out and stuff. So just being a lot more in tune with it. So yeah, I don't drink anymore, I don't smoke anymore, which sometimes you do worry that like is going to affect your ability to be a good performer. I guess, in a way. Like, no, of course. But at first, you're kind of like, oh God, like.
Yeah.
But being so much more in tune with who I am, and still, it took me a long time to say I'm a stand-up comedian, mainly because I can't be bothered with the questions that you get. Tell us a joke. Like, we're in the garage. Like, I don't want to like. I get it. Even like when you go for counselling and stuff like that, they get quite excited, and like. And even when I was on Job Seekers, it's like, oh, that's really, really cool. It's like, can you just give me my £80, please? Like, I don't want to have a whole chat about it. But yeah, like no, it's so much more important to me, and it shifts how you value the nerves beforehand
Yeah.
to what it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, how about yourself? What about the positives for you?
I suppose brief. There's three really. One, I'm going to contradict what I said earlier about being exactly the same on stage as off, because I think one is when we're on stage, we show on the best version of ourselves. You know, so on stage, I'm the me I really wish I was. You know, so people don't see me getting mardy or stressed or any of that kind of stuff. You know, so I quite like the version of me that I can pretend I am for a bit. That's one. Two is the travelling, particularly the international stuff. So just before lockdown, did a bunch of shows in Mexico, and it was so much fun. So much fun. I discovered Raicilla, which is tequila's naughty cousin, but that's a different story. And I made a friend who was a tequila dealer, which obviously being a poet, I approve of that job title, yeah.
It's a great kids poet, that, isn't it? Tequila dealer. Yeah.
Yeah, and the third is I think I'm at my happiest when I've just birthed a new show, and it's at that point where it's sort of unsullied by audience. You know, so in your head it's pretty great, and it's like it will do its first, particularly like the North American fringes, and there's a couple in Ireland that are like 5 days or 10 days long, and it's the first fringe of a new show. Say first number one is as rough as old boots. Show number two, everything's a lot better. Show number three, it just clicks. You know, usually, and so when a new show's just starting to evolve as it's been exposed to its audience, I think that's where I'm at my happiest, because you've just created your new thing. Yeah, they're all my children, but you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like my babies are my jokes are my babies, and sometimes I'm reluctant to
drown them.
I'm at that kind of point at the moment. So just did my new show yesterday, and so it is that thing of the joy of doing new material. And you can get really bored, can't you?
No, because all my stuff's good.
Yeah.
But talking about new shows, thank you for the reminder. If anyone's interested, I'm doing a brand new show later on today, this afternoon at Firebug at 2:30. It's called Bruce Edhouse on Becoming a Person, and it's all about identity and what drives us to become the people that we do. Everybody is, of course, welcome. So we're going to be finishing in a few minutes. We will be taking donations for LAMP at the door. We do have a card reader as well. If you don't have cash, that's absolutely fine. If you'd like to make a donation, that would be brilliant. But if we do have time, it would be nice to take some questions from the audience as well, if anybody hasn't.
Yes, I'd like to ask, do you all have a sort of like a reflection of the longest 5 minutes of your lives? You know, is it that you often think, you know, dwell on something that was really, it seemed like the longest time that you've ever done a show for, say, for the shortest time, really, but...
Can I just say that there's one night that me and a few of my comedian friends did here in Leicester, and we now refer to it as the night the laughter died. that was 8 years ago, but just that phrase brings it back, and we're right back there in that dreadful 5 minutes. Yes.
Yeah, I think when I tried stand-up and did it badly and wasn't very prepared and was just juggling so much, I think, yeah, that never bodes well in terms of, you know, when it's like when we're with people that we want to be with, time goes so quickly, doesn't it? But when you've got an audience in front of you that are not responding, there is no laughter, that is like, you know, wading through mud and you can't wait to finish. You know, so it's but yeah, so that's kind of why I thought maybe being a promoter might be slightly easier.
I think my worst moment as a performer, right, it's a very loose definition of gig, but I think it counts because I was performing in the stricter sense. I've had plenty where where it's failed, intensely, but in terms of the worst 5 minutes, it was the Comedy Festival's fault that on this particular year, it was sponsored by the Mercury, Leicester Mercury. And I was employed at between 8 and 10 in the morning. Was it between 10? I don't know, it was in the morning. and the whole Mercury's angle, you get a free joke with every paper. What this meant was if you bought your newspaper from a certain vendor on Gallatry Gate, you got a free joke, and that was told to you by me. And I'd been out drinking with the staff from the Comedy Festival the night before. It had been a very, very late one. I'd had about 3 hours sleep. And you know it's the kind of hangover that wakes you up at 4 in the morning and goes, I'm here, and that warns you to have your preemptive ibuprofen. This was the creeper. This is the one where you think you've got away with it and it takes you down over the course of the morning. And it's on Gallatry Gate, and it had just started, and I couldn't go and get any painkillers because I didn't want to skive off, you know. Obviously, you can only tell youth certificate Tommy Cooper-esque groaners to anyone who buys a paper. You can't tell anything that's actually funny. So you're just being stared at by, and commuters are not always the happiest of demographics when they're on their way to work. So everyone will go, hello, and you just tell them this groaner. And it just... and that on repeat, and then this pain started, and the 5 minutes the moment, I mean that was a 2 hour experience, but the few minutes was where two things happened either side of me simultaneously. One is that a bagpiper started up, and he was there, and he wasn't even Scottish as well. He got the whole kit on. He's going, hello mate, you're right, and he started playing this thing, and that was like, oh no. And then the bloke in the vendor in the Mercury thing started eating his breakfast, which was this homemade fried egg and bacon torpedo, and he went, and the egg just went like bursting acne, just and sort of dripping onto this, join this dry, massive, coagulated, historically dry egg yolk. So I've got him doing the visual, him doing the audio. I'm telling jokes to people who could cheerfully plan and carry out my murder, and I got, it was almost spiritual.
When I was playing the bagpipes next to the
Can I ask a question about the audience's mental health? There was a thing recently where Julian Clary did a thing on telly very recently, and he hadn't done stand-up for a long time, and he was doing the sort of 1980s crowd work that he used to do, insulting the audience, and he took dated very badly.
Oh, right, yeah.
Are we less rude to the audience because we're more considerate than maybe we once were? Thinking about, basically the ritual humiliation of people who have no comeback.
That's a great question.
Crowd work has gone, especially crowd work on social media, is huge. A lot of the videos you will see now is crowd work because I think it's comedians worrying about, if you just do crowd work, you're not getting rid of any material. So you can keep on doing crowd work videos, and they're really, really popular. I think it totally depends on the setting, because some people go to things like a gong show, especially the ones at the Comedy Store. People go to them to have the back and forth. But then the confusion is sometimes where, especially if you're doing your own solo shows, the idea is people are coming along to see you there. I think more often than not, the better comedians as well, especially, are the ones who are generally nicer, and you can have a much more fun with it if everyone understands you're teasing. It's a definite learning curve where I see some newer acts who, when they're comparing, they can be a bit too mean and not realise how horrible they're being. I've heard stories where someone was talking about how their cat died, and someone in the audience was like, "My cat's died," and then they cried and left, and it was just like, that's not fair, at all, to get upset there, where you didn't really know that. I try and be nice, but still, I think there's a line of cheeky. You can probably say most things as long as you smile with it, rather than just being horrible to someone. But sometimes there's these videos of comedian slams heckler, but sometimes it's just being awful to the heckler's. I don't think that's fair at all what you just said there of calling them
it can cross the line into bullying.
Yeah,
can't it?
totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then it's just explaining. Sometimes I have loads of fun just explaining to an audience member, just do you know what you're doing by constantly talking? What do you want this to all be about you? And in Edinburgh this year, someone just, because again the shift from Friday to lovely weekday shows to weekends, where the show was full. I'm talking this whole story about working at the COVID testing centre, talking about calling up, going to counselling, and the lady from the counselling was like a salesman for Anxious when I was talking about depression, and she thought I had anxiety, but she was really trying to push me onto being anxious. And it was like, I was like, no, I'm not anxious. It's like, you sure? And then it's like, no.
I am now.
Yeah, but this one guy kept on talking, and it was taking everyone else out of the moment. And so, very sweet of the audience, they were like, separate them, as if they were like children, but they were like grown men. And then I said to one guy, I was like, why are you being so stubborn about staying? And then he said to me, why are you being so stubborn about me going? And then you just left in this bind there, because I'm not gonna be like, oh, I just politely ask, can you please just go? And it is the thing tied in with, we're choosing to do it, the audience ideally are choosing to be there. Sometimes you do get audiences who are there as if they've been caught speeding, and it's the only way they can get out of the points is having to sit through a comedy show. You know, I had once in Hull where I started telling a story about when I used to live in my mum's garage. My opening line, I used to live in my mum's garage, and this guy was like, get on with it! The first thing I said, get on with it! Like, I was the first act on. Just started telling a story at a comedy night, how crazy. And he was like, get on with it! It's like, do you have somewhere to be? Are you in a rush? Just let me tell my story. But most of the time, I think you end up getting to a point where it doesn't really matter anymore either. I call them non-ranking events when it's gigs that don't matter. I don't lose any tour points. Like, no one's going to boot me off. And always remind myself that this is fun. Like, I'm choosing to do it.
That's the thing. I think just to give you my own answer to that question, generally, people will want to work with you if you're a nice person. If you are not a nice person, they won't want to work with you. And I think more and more comedians have kind of cottoned on to that over the years, because, Judith, I'm sure you agree, if you have an actor on who's not brilliant but is a really nice person and just, you know, contributes to the atmosphere, you're going to book them again. You know, and I think comedians have kind of got a little bit more wise to that over the years, and that can only be a good thing.
Being low maintenance goes a long way.
Yeah. And the phrase "a safe pair of hands" as well. People get booked for being a safe pair of hands.
Yeah.
And I suppose a lot of times as well like the Jimmy Carr shows where people shout out from the audience, and then they want to be like, oh, Jimmy made fun of me. And it's just like, no, like, it's not. I tell audiences sometimes, especially doing a solo show, it's like, I barely need you here. This is so self-indulgent, so arrogant what I'm doing. It's lovely that you're here, it's great, but like, you do not need to be involved, and you will sometimes get people chiming in. It's like, at no point have I written in my notes, someone in the audience will help me with that joke. Like, no one ever, you know. So.
Do you all find that you need to psych yourselves up before a show? Have you got certain techniques of, you know, before you go on, and then winding down at the end? You know, have you got certain techniques that you use, or do you need to? Do you find?
Yeah, I think for me it's like, I'll thank the comedians for, you know, on social media, on our Facebook page, just thanks for coming and everything. People say, oh, you had a good night or whatever.
Sorry, there's someone locked in. The comedian's dream.
Instead of taking donations at the door, you have to pay to get out.
And then, probably, because I won't have eaten much before the show. Even as a promoter, you know, I'm a little bit nervous. So I think just watching some telly, and then just winding down. My children will have gone to bed, and just me time, you know, and hopefully sleep all right. But it's just allowing that time to unwind, really. Your mind to unwind, and just like being sure yourself, yes, that was fine, and you did the best you could. Perhaps mull over it a bit, and I think it's like anything, you know, if you go out late, you can't always go to bed straight away. So I think when you put something on, it is the adrenaline, and everything's got to sort of calm down and got to relax. And so I sometimes might do a corpse position on the floor of my lounge, you know, and, just to stretch out, you know, and because I found myself on the first day of the comedy festival sort of propped up against the bar for like, you know, the first hour, and then in the interval and at the end, and I was really sore, you know, because I was just in that position. So I needed to get myself out of it, you know, and so it's kind of mental and physical sort of de-stress. And hopefully not having to get up early the next day.
Cool. Have we got time for one more question?
Yeah.
Anybody?
No, I was going to ask, do you think there's anything that shouldn't be joked about, or is there anything that you personally wouldn't joke about?
No. I think...
Next question.
Not really. I mean, there's a lot of things I wouldn't joke about because I'm not good enough to have written the right joke about it. You know, that's a different issue. That's about my ability. But in general terms, I think it's not the subject that makes a joke offensive, it's the intent. It's about why are you telling that joke. And I do believe that sometimes the trickier or more awkward the subject, the more we have, you get a bit righteous about it, almost a certain responsibility to talk openly about it. And the more we laugh at something, the more open we are about it. And laughter is a very empowering thing to do. So, you know, humour's like, it's a tool like a hammer, you know, it could be tremendously creative or tremendously destructive depending on how we use it, but I don't think it's the subject that will make that decision. It's about, I think we all have a duty to ask ourselves, why are we telling that joke? You know, I mean, I've got three comedy, you know, I've got a comedy show about dementia, you know, and it's a question you get, well, how can you do it? But, you know, we've seen the show, you know, so who done it on an Alzheimer's ward, you know, it's you know, it's like it works, but a lot of people will assume, oh, it's me doing a load of Finding Nemo jokes for an hour. So yeah, and there's a lot of horrible things going on in the world, and I think it's good to talk about them. Yeah. So I think it's the intent. I think it's all about why are we doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Freud wrote quite a lot about humour, and you know, one of the things that he said about humour is it can be used to kind of take away something's power. You know, it can be used to kind of puncture the power that these things hold over us. And I think that's kind of what you're saying there. We can use these things in a positive way if we do them properly. Yeah.
I guess also it's a lot of, I don't want to stereotype here, but as someone, let's call them Dobby Bavro.
What is it with you and 80s comedians?
Because after the COVID thing, I did a gig with Dobby in Weston-super-Mare. And the first thing he said to me was like, "You're not one of these woke ones, are you?" Straight away. And I was like, "Do you mean considerate?" That's all it means a lot of the time. But then didn't even let me answer that, and then he went straight into, "You can't make jokes about anything anymore." And it's like, you can make jokes about whatever you want, but I think a lot of the time, and I've got a bit in the news show about it, of seeing these two 20-year-olds at a cafe in Clarendon Park. Well, one of the 20-year-olds said, it's like, "I just don't really have any opinions." And it was sad for a 20-year-old to say that, but then also I know lots of people probably who shouldn't have opinions. But I'll never say you're not allowed them. There's an advert at the moment on TalkSport for, I think, the Jeremy Vine TV show, where at the end of the advert, there's a voice of someone talking, and it's like, "Thank you, Jeremy, for letting people like me have an opinion." And it's just like, no one's saying you can't have an opinion, no one's saying you can't have a joke about it, but you have to also understand it's like some people aren't going to be happy with it. And I think you can joke about absolutely anything you want, and the intent is totally right, but also you've got to make sure you can justify it as much as you can when someone does have a problem with it, rather than, I think a lot of newer comedians, when you first started starting, you do a bit of this shock comedy, and like I'm working with secondary school kids, and some of them do want to say quite shocking things, but then as soon as you politely ask them, it's like, well, why do you want to say that? And a lot of the time it's like, well, it's just kind of naughty. So that's fine, but then when you're an adult, and like, if you want to say something a bit naughty, you kind of need to also have something else to back it up. If you generally believe it, I think you can say it, and you will have an audience for it, but you've also got to understand that you're probably not going to have the huge reach that you did once have, Bobby Devereaux and Jim Davidson. And stop getting upset about it. No one wants to come see you. Yeah.
Cool. So I think that's about us done, isn't it?
Are you the only one? You're the only one who has a show to promote, don't you?
Yeah. I did that earlier.
This is why Bruce organised this, actually.
Yeah, there'll be a shuttle bus taking But you know, we always say as well, you know, comedy is not just for February. Your next Tickle Pink show's in May, is it?
May the 20th.
Yeah.
At
So
the Y Theatre.
yep, just keep an eye out for that. But I'd just like to say thank you all, not only for coming here in the first place, but for sticking with us while we've blathered on, having a great time, and thank you for sharing that with us. And once again, a big thank you to LAMP for arranging this event. So if you just join me in thanking both LAMP and Judith Pitchley, Rob G and Jack Campbell.
And Bruce Edgar.